All right, guys, welcome back to the Former Farm Kid channel. Doing the final wrap on my uh, Black Walnut crotch cut slab coffee table. This piece came a little closer to the outer part of the tree, so therefore it is smaller. There were two limbs, i.e. the crotch, one coming off in this direction, and this limb was deeper into the tree, so you see more cambium layer up here and a smaller abutment. This limb was near to the outside of the tree, so you can see it basically shooting off. I didn't want to round this right here. I kind of wanted to give it somewhat of a asymmetric appearance, so I just left that on there. It does mean that you have to do a random placement of the legs basically on the table. So as you can see underneath here, they are not symmetric. The ones on the rear here may look like they line up, but they really don't. And the ones to the left certainly don't as well, because if you do it symmetrically, say in a rectangular form, as soon as somebody takes and sits on this part right here, there's a good possibility the table is going to flip up. So this leg needs to be moved farther out. So there's a good utility reason for doing that, but I like that asymmetric random look, especially here in the front where you get placement of the legs. And the legs, by the way, are Black Walnut as well. This one has a little cambium on the corner. This one here is a little bit more solid Black Walnut, as is this one here. And what I did was mill up some 3.5-inch stock, which, as I look at the legs and back at the top, which isn't really obvious from beneath, you do need a pretty good anchor there at the top, because they are basically pinned to the table. I leave a small gap in there, so if the legs would ever have to be removed, there are 3 pins. They can easily take a real thin curve saw and you just sever those pins basically, but they're really not designed per se to come on and off. So the water feature turned out pretty nice as well. The tributaries didn't get quite as blue as I would have liked, because they're small anyway, but they are filled. These had to be filled with syringes. These right here do not connect to the main body of water, so they are black like ditches, and they are epoxy filled, which are most of the checks. And as I mentioned earlier, I kind of cheat on my tables. I do the epoxy fill almost last. Most guys will, before they do a tabletop finish, go ahead and fill these in and then do their leveling after the fact, which leaves these all tore up, which requires hours and hours and hours of sanding and buffing. So since I pour it afterwards, I have to be very careful how I pour. I don't want it coming beyond the shoreline here. So if you do it slowly, do it well, do it with syringe. You don't want to just pour into the center, because this stuff, you can overfill because it takes a little while for this to reach the edges. So I do it with a syringe and spread it out real well and evenly, and just do a little bit of a time at a time. Next time I'm going to try to do it a little different. I've got an epoxy sample that I'm going to go ahead and route across, and I'm just wondering that, because I do put my final fill is a UV coat, which I dye to the same degree as the area beneath it. I don't want it clear. Sometimes when you want to see inside of these, you can leave it clear, but there wasn't a whole lot of feature in that, so I just dyed them to the same color. So next time, I'm going to go ahead and do an early fill and then run the router over it, but I'm first going to do a sample of that. I'm going to see if I cannot re-clear that epoxy with a new brushed layer of epoxy, which would only be several microns thick. I would do it very thin layer. That way it's more or less level, because when I fill, I do leave just a hair of edge here, because inevitably these are not perfectly in plane, and you may get an early fill and a later fill. And where's a good example of that? Right here. This area here in the center of the crotch is a little bit lower. So she pushed out a little bit here more. It does make this pretty even though. Seems like that happened one other place. Right here, as a matter of fact. This did a little bit of a push where the rest is just a hair beneath. So in my mind, it's a great compromise. And frankly, you know, people absolutely do not notice unless you point it out to them. And even when you do, they don't care. So at any rate, the color itself turned out really nice because this limb here is closer to the outside. We do see a thicker cambium here, so I kind of like that. And again, I think I've mentioned before that I do preserve the bark where I'm able to. People just absolutely positively love that. Myself, here's an area where we took the bark off, and I like this too. I mean, I think that's a pretty good finish. I mean, that is the typical live edge. And so it does take a lot more work to preserve the bark. I actually had a little push off on this area right here. So I had to re-epoxy this edge right there. And you can see that fill. Yeah, it's a little dark here. Probably not going to be able to see it. You can see the thick fill, and it only went to about this layer right here, and then it started pushing out on me. So what happened was I had to sand this off and refinish this whole edge, but it did a good job at filling that back in. And I also pushed it all the way basically down to there. So that turned out pretty good. But worst case, if it's abused and kicked around and who knows what happens with it and the bark starts to come off, you just take it off. I mean, it's not a huge deal. Just remove the bark and go ahead and finish up the live edge like you normally would. But it's worth the risk. Like I say, it does take a lot more work because I epoxy glue all that bark on. I cut a curve from the back and fill it with epoxy to glue that part on. And then I coat all of the bark with epoxy, and obviously it doesn't soak through all of the bark. If it soaked it up like a sponge, that would be great. It does soak up a lot of it, but not all of it. So, it's a matter of personal taste. My bow ties have turned out real well. This one here kind of more disappeared. This one here is a little bit more obvious, and I was hoping they would boom out a little bit more than that, but no big deal. So this table is going on donation at our church garage sale, and we're going to start the bidding on it at $250, and I've got a $250 bid on it as we speak, and we'll see how it does. But it's going to our missions teams that go out into the world to spread the gospel. So guys, any questions, comments, please feel free to leave those for me. Appreciate you watching. Give me a thumbs up if you like what you see, and if not, give me a comment. Everybody's got their own opinion about it. And keep up the great work. God bless, and we will see you on the next one.